Welcome to the BrightWord Books Podcast, where we highlight powerful stories and the authors who bring them to life. In today's episode, we're honored to feature James Cunneen, author of the deeply reflective and spiritually rich novel At Night He Remembers. Now, his book traces the life of Jacob, beginning with his profound encounter with Christ as a young lieutenant in Vietnam. From there, readers follow him through decades of service as a college professor, campus minister, and ultimately as an elderly man wrestling with one of the most honest and universal questions believers face. Was my life truly fruitful for God? James Cunneen invites us into a journey that examines calling, faithfulness, doubt, perseverance, and the longing to one day stand before God and say, Father, I have accomplished the work you sent me to do. Today, we'll be talking with James about the inspiration behind the book, the message he hopes readers will take away, and the deeper spiritual themes woven into Jacob's life story. So, James, welcome to the podcast. It's lovely to meet you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Glad to be with you today.
Fantastic. We're going to have a good old chat about your book and about Jacob's spiritual journey, I think. So let's jump straight in, shall we?
Thank you.
No problem. So, At Night He Remembers follows Jacob from his early years as a lieutenant in Vietnam to his later reflections as an old man, as I mentioned. I mean, what inspired you to write this sweeping spiritual journey?
Well, your use of the word sweeping is really appropriate because even though it's quite a short novel, it's only 150 pages long, it covers 50 years of one person's life. What I wanted to do was to show one Christian's journey from his becoming a Christian to really through the rest of his life to at the end of his life, where, as you said, he really does not just question, but agonize over, God, have I done what you wanted me to do? Have I accomplished what you sent me to do? So there's really 4 sections or chapters to this short book. The first one is Jacob's time coming to Christ when he was a lieutenant on an artillery fire base in Vietnam. One of my readers said, "What's an artillery fire base?" So that means at least we have some young readers.
True, yes.
And secondly, when he was a college instructor on a campus, and then how he grew to maturity as a Christian, and then also his years as a campus minister, and again, finally, at the end of his life, where he was just really reflecting on, was I effective? Was I doing what God wanted me to do? So one of the questions that came up is, why a novel? And I've published 2 other nonfiction books about the nuts and bolts of Christian ministry. Someone said, are they bestsellers? And I said, no, I think people are waiting not to buy them because they want to wait for the movies to come out. That is a joke. So in a way, it's kind of like if someone were sitting watching a football game and a person handed them a book on the techniques of landing a jetliner. They would think, this is uninteresting and irrelevant. But if they were sitting in the cockpit of a Boeing 737 and both pilots were unconscious, that book would be then relevant and interesting. How to land an airplane. So in a way, my 2 nonfiction books, I felt like were very helpful and interesting to people that were definitely personally involved in serving the Lord and having a personal ministry. But for most people, including most Christians, that would simply not be the case. That would be something. So I thought, I'll write a story and I'll put these same principles of ministry in a novel with characters and situations that people might be interested in. Even Jesus told stories. There's a great compelling power to stories because especially if a book has dialogue. That's the first thing I always look at when I open a novel is like, is there a lot of dialogue? I don't want endless descriptions of, what a forest looked like.
Yeah.
So I think that having it be a novel was helpful for even people that are not necessarily religious. One comment I got from an old Vietnam veteran a hero, by the way. He was awarded Valor Medals and Purple Heart, which is for being wounded. And he said the Vietnam thing was very realistic historically. So I thought, well, there's one reason that people might read that. The second is a reader who is decidedly not religious said, I'm reading the second section. There's a lot of religious stuff in it, but I want to find out what happens with the beautiful girl and the super smart young man. I want to see what that relationship ends up with. So I thought, okay, that pretty much defines why I wrote a novel.
Well, that makes sense, doesn't it? Yeah, well, and you've got those. I don't know what they're called in author speak, but the intertwining stories. That's what keeps you sort of involved in something, isn't it? If you're watching a movie or whatever, it's not necessarily literal all the way, is it?
Correct. Yes. Yeah.
So,
So, yeah, I think the thing is that I did this in 4 parts, and basically the 4 parts are part 1, which is the Vietnam episode, is the main character, who I would call a somewhat not sarcastic, but an agnostic with attitude. Not really a hateful attitude toward Christians or the faith, but there were some reasons that he had for wondering if God even existed. And of course, the title of the book comes just from, as you put it out earlier, a time of reflection at night. And a lot of us do that, especially as you get a little bit older. You wake up at 3 a.m. and you just start thinking about things. Well, our main character, Jacob, would wake up in the middle of the night and he remembered things. At night, he remembers. And a lot of what he remembered were either sad or things that he felt like either he had failed at, or that if God really existed, why did he allow such a thing to happen? So, yeah, that's kind of Jacob's little journey in Vietnam.
yeah, okay. Well, let's go back to Vietnam then.
Yep.
Tell us about his life-changing encounter with Christ. I mean, that becomes obviously the main reason of the book, doesn't it? Or the anchor of it, I guess. Why was that encounter so pivotal? Mind you, I mean, that answers itself really. If one has an encounter with Christ, that's pretty pivotal to most people, I would have thought. But I mean, tell us about that, and tell us about how you approached writing it, because clearly, unless you had your own moment, it would be quite difficult to envisage that, wouldn't it?
Yes, and in a way, you're jumping ahead to another thing that I want to talk about. Is people say, "Was this autobiographical?" So
Exactly.
people that know me think, "Oh, well, he just wrote his own story." So I was an artillery officer in Vietnam, and a college instructor, and all that kind of stuff. So what I wanted to do was take a person who was, let's say, a skeptic, put him in a situation. And what happened was that he met a young medic. Now, medics in the Army are not doctors, but they're highly trained medical, they're probably closer to like an EMT or a paramedic, but they're highly trained to treat people who are either wounded or injured, have injuries from battle. So this medic, Doc Yoder was his name. He and the main character got into a relationship because of a rather dramatic thing. I won't do spoilers on most of these things, but a dramatic thing happened. And this Doc Yoder is a serious Christian and actually joined the Army in order to be able to share the gospel or the Christian story with others in the Army, which he figured there are probably not a whole lot of Christians there, and he was right. So as time goes on, Doc Yoder explains to Jacob just why he believes what he believes, why he believes in God. And at one point, Doc Yoder asked Jacob, I've told you why I believe in God. You tell me why you don't believe in God. And at this point, Jacob, the main character, shares some of the things that have troubled him. And one was either things that he had done himself that he thought were hurtful or harmful to other people. And it was kind of like, why did I do that? Of course, there's a wonderful passage in the Bible where even the Christian leader Paul agonized over the same thing. I know what I should do, but I find myself, doing something else. And then the other thing was, Jacob thought, if God is really loving and powerful, why does he allow, there was a story of a young girl in junior high. That tells you how far back this goes. It wasn't middle school. It was called junior high in America back then. And he tells of a girl that was one of his classmates who was very poor, from a poor family. There was no father there, which was unusual in those days. And the kids made fun of her. She dressed poorly, all of this, that, and the other. And one day, young Jacob, a junior high school student himself, said to her, "Why don't you tell your mother how bad things are here? Maybe she could help." And the girl simply says, "I love my mom." And Jacob thought, what a kind girl. If that girl can be so kind that she wants to spare her mother unhappiness, why can't God be the same and spare this girl the kind of the ridicule and the bullying that she's experiencing? So then he's explaining this to Doc Yoder, and Doc Yoder says, if that's how you feel about God, or if that's how you view him, is uncaring or indifferent, then I wouldn't want to believe in a God like that either. And that got Jacob's attention. So more and more things happen. A tragedy, there's a battle that occurs at the fire base. This won't be a spoiler, but Doc Yoder was trying to help a person who was severely addicted to heroin, so much so that this person felt, I'll never leave here alive. So he said to Doc Yoder, I'm just on this fire base to die until I overdose. And Doc said, yeah, that's you'll never get clean. So Doc was trying to lead that person to Christ. Well, during the battle of the fire base, both Doc Yoder and this other person were killed. And Jacob went from being sarcastically indifferent to God to being angry at him. And that's wonderful. There's even a passage in the Bible where God says, I wish that people were either hot or cold toward me. If they're indifferent or lukewarm, I can't do anything. Yeah. So Jacob went from being indifferent toward God to being angry with him. And why do you allow, this guy was trying to serve you. Why did you do this? What kind of a God would allow the people that are serving him to suffer this way? And Jacob was injured during that battle also. And as he's in a hospital following a surgery to patch him up, he's reflecting on this, and he thought, well, Doc Yoder asked me to at least read the Bible or part of it. So he went and got a Bible and he read it, and that changed everything. It was the power, the logical, philosophically valid power of Scripture that in the end got him to think, I understand the Jesus thing. If Jesus, came to pay the price for the bad stuff that we do, I can understand the logic there. But he thought, a philosopher could have thought of that. And by the way, Doc Yoder compared people's wrongdoing to, he had sutured up a little Vietnamese boy one time, and Jacob was there to help him. And he said to Jacob, what if that little boy's, cut had become infected and septic? And he's got no medical attention. That could have turned to gangrene. So even if 98% of his body was healthy, the gangrene would have killed him. And he said, the Bible uses the word sin. He said, that's what sin is. It's like cancer or like sepsis. Even if you have a little bit, it keeps us from being in a relationship with God. So after reflecting and reading scriptures, one night, Jacob simply asked God, okay, do you exist? Are you real? And he woke up the next morning in the hospital ward to the groans of wounded men, and he thought nothing has changed. But then all of a sudden he said, no, wait, something has changed. He could no longer have the cynical skepticism. It just wasn't there anymore. And it seemed like his arguments against the existence of God were just either bitterness or foolishness. So then he prays, the one verse that he knew in the Bible. If you confess with your mouth and believe in your heart that Jesus is Lord, you will be saved. And he prayed that. And that's how he came to Christ.
Wow. That's an amazing story. I mean, it actually really sounds interesting. So maybe there will be a movie. I don't know. But so
Would you star in it? You could be the middle-aged Jacob.
I could, couldn't I? Yeah.
Or the young one.
No. But you're right. You're right. I did think that, but no. Let's stick with the middle-aged one. Okay, I can do an accent, so that's fine. Yeah, just let me know. So anyway, back to reality, kind of. So obviously you're writing about Jacob, and the thing that gets me about this is that he's a skeptic for a long time. Okay, or for any amount of time. It doesn't really matter whether it's long or not. And then he has, as you said, he's in the hospital and he wakes up one morning and then it's kind of not all change, but enough change, right?
Yeah.
And that lasts throughout his life. But what makes him really think about towards the end, I guess, worrying about whether his life was fruitful for God? I mean, how did that emerge for you when you were writing the book, but rather than just it being a story,
Well, that's a great question. And I think because of the way Jacob came into the Christian faith, from the very moment that happened, he thought, I want to be a serious Christian. I don't want to just be someone that, sits in a church and, daydreams about bass fishing or something during the sermon. I want to be serious. I want to do something. I want to be like Doc Yoder, who served the Lord, even though it cost him his life. By the way, Doc Yoder was meant to go home, but Army terminology here is he re-upped. Do you know what that means?
Yeah. I guess he
kind of signed up for another year in Vietnam.
Yeah.
In order to try to see Jacob come to Christ. And he lost his life because of it. So, yeah, so I think the thing is that he wants so much to be a serious Christian, but he didn't know how to do that. So when he was an instructor on a college campus in East Florida, he met a young campus minister who started to meet with him and established him in the things of the faith. Now, the way that young minister put it was, he said, there's 7 and 3. There's 7 disciplines of the Christian faith, and there's 3 character areas. The disciplines just have to do with, how to read and study the Bible, to make sure that you have fellowship with other believers, how to pray, even some things like memorizing scripture for those that like to do that. And the 3 character areas are, it's so funny. I know we've got a video problem here, but I keep, enumerating to you on my hand here. The 3 character areas are humility, the opposite of pride or insecurity; God's perspective on money and stuff, the opposite of greed or anxiety; and sexual purity, the opposite simply of lust. That's something most young men, old men wrestle with. So those were the things that Jacob got established in with the help of this young minister. And what he realized was that this gave him a sense of freedom from pride, from fears, from pretense, insecurity, freedom to serve God with joy and meaning without really having to second guess anything. Of course, he does at the end of his life kind of second guess. But I think what he found was that being a mature Christian was not conformity, but it was the opposite. It was like a freedom to be who you really are.
That's interesting, actually. So, yeah, actually, that is a good point. So, just thinking about that, the freedom to be who you are because you believe God made you, and you're following God's, well, I was going to say advice, but you're following God's path, right? Is that what you mean?
Yes. Very good way to put it.
Yeah. That's interesting. So, James, in the book, you're asking, like, obviously this powerful question, did my life matter for God? I mean, why do you think so many people worry about that or are concerned about that? If God is forgiving, then why should you worry about whether your life mattered? Surely it would.
Well, you're exactly right. We shouldn't worry but we can certainly wonder.
Hmm.
And I think the reason that a lot of Christians wonder at the end of their life, or even, before that period in their life, am I doing what God wants me to do? Is that at least in the American Christian community, there's very little emphasis on lay people doing serious ministry. And by serious ministry, I define it as sharing the gospel with the lost. Someone said discipleship without a heart for the lost is really just fellowship. And then helping people to grow to maturity, doing the same things that others have taught you. So I think that a lot of Christians are simply unclear about what God is calling them to. So, I mean, if you think of a kind of a sort of a spectrum on its side, God wants all people to be saved, to grow to maturity, and to enter into ministry. That's just is like the priesthood of believers.
Mm.
But what does a person do? How do they find out? And most people, if they would realize that the way they are gifted, or the way that God has equipped them, what they're strong at, their talents, what gives them joy, and what other people affirm in their life that they're good at, that's probably going to be the sphere of their ministry. So, for example, I've spent my whole life on a college campus, essentially. That's what I really enjoy. I like that age group. I like, all of the things that they're going through. Other people, Mother Teresa comes to mind. Her heart was really one of compassion and comfort. Others prefer counseling. They think, I want to help people get through on the struggles. But so I think that a lot of people wonder if I serve God the way I should have, simply because they're not sure what they were called to. In other words, what kind of ministry should they have been in, and how would they seek a team of people that are doing that?
Yeah. Well, of course, there is no roadmap, right, to life, and that's it. We either just exist and bounce around like in a pinball machine, just sort of dealing with it, or if like you, again, that's a really good point. It's made me think again. Think about my own talents for what they are, and whether or not I'm using them to spread the word of God or anything else like that. So if I put myself in the shoes of somebody who is a believer and thinks that, I can see that actually really helping. So if I'm a communicator, for instance, then yeah, I should be spreading the gospel to people, shouldn't I? If that is the way that I think.
Yes.
Hmm.
And very often, people's natural talents and abilities match, the kind of spiritual gift that God gives. So, there is the gift of teaching in the Bible. Well, if someone is a high school teacher and loves it, and just, that could very well be his gift. But I think the thing is that people really can find out from kind of the types of ministry that they're familiar with. Should they be a pastor? Should they be someone in the church? There is actually the gift of helps. People that set the chairs up for the meeting, those sorts of things. That's all service to God.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So as opposed to being an academic theologian or something, I mean that there's a place for that as well, isn't there, right? But when we're talking,
Certainly, yes.
yeah, but when we're talking about sort of ministry, that's a whole different thing, isn't it? I mean, you in the book you're talking about Jacob being a campus minister, a college professor, all of these things mixed together, which they're not necessarily mixed together, but I guess his faith is always there, right? But these sort of roles, they're not always depicted, are they, in faith-based literature, college professors and things like that. So what made you highlight ministry in those sort of environments?
Well, of course, the sort of obvious answer is that I experience those things. But the other is that people can grow to maturity and serve the Lord very fruitfully just in the mainstream of life. They don't need to go to seminary. I think that's wonderful that God calls people to go to seminary and be, seminary professors or pastors. But people can grow to maturity and be strong in their faith and help others just kind of in the mainstream of life as a college instructor, as a lawyer, as a teacher, really as a truck driver, whatever it may be. So I think in a way, Jacob's journey, he came to Christ in Vietnam because he understood the brilliant logic of the Christian message. And the logic is kind of, if people do bad, selfish things and God is holy, we really can't go to him the way we are. Otherwise, we'd pollute him. And so he has to make a way for people whom he loves, by the way, to have a way to bridge that gap between where they are and into a relationship with God. So there's a wonderful statement in the Bible that says, for Christ came to die for our sins once and for all, to bring us to God. So unlike other approaches to how people connect with God, in the Christian faith, it's God that does it. He sends his son, Jesus Christ, who did not do anything wrong as a human being. He pays a debt he doesn't owe because we owe a debt we can't pay. Now, the illustration we use with college students is just this. If you had a 4-year-old niece or nephew and you're in a store and that child broke something worth a couple of $100, either on purpose or accidentally, he or she did it, but they can't pay for it. You, older person, didn't do it, but you can pay for it. You take out your credit card. That is in the U.S. courts a concept called propitiation or substitutionary payment for crime, and that's exactly what Jesus did. You know, he taught wonderful things and he healed people and all of that, but his time of ministry was really very brief, only about 4 years. And the main thing he came to do was to pay the debt that we owe so that we could have a relationship with God. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It's incredible to be reminded that it was only 4 years, actually.
I know it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, but he was in his 30s, right? So, but yeah, this is the thing, though, isn't it? So, what you're doing, and this is where Jacob comes in and sort of emphasizes the way that the journey through life and towards God should be, well, slow and steady, right? Faithful service rather than like dramatic events and things like that, or dramatic achievements. What were you trying to say when you did that? I mean, what are you trying to say about true spiritual success? Is it just about constantly trying, or can you, I don't know, can you not do a one big deal kind of thing?
Well, yeah, that's a really astute question. Um, it's understandable that in most spheres of life, including the Christian community, the old saying of nickels and noses, you know, how many people came and how much money was raised at the event, you know, the nickels and noses concept. Um, but the biblical model for effective ministry is quite different. And it goes this way. And at the end of his life, Jesus said, and this is a very familiar thing, go and make disciples. Teach them to observe all I've told you to do. Well, that's more than just imparting knowledge. We teach what we know, but we reproduce what we are. So when Jesus said, make disciples, he meant you got to be with people and help them. It's kind of like if you had a 3-year-old daughter or son and you put a plate of lima beans in front of them and you say, now I'm going to go away here. I'm not going to watch you, but you eat those lima beans. Well, it ain't going to happen. So it's basically, you got to sit there and bean by bean, you know, you help them to do that. And so when Jesus said, make disciples, teaching them to observe or to do all that I have told you, that's quite different than just imparting knowledge or handing people, you know, a book, for example. Paul, the early Christian leader, Paul, figured out a great strategy, and it's mentioned in a verse in 1 Timothy 2, where it says, Paul says to a man he's discipled, a young man, the things that you have received from me, these entrust to faithful ones who will be able to teach others as well. So there's 4 generations there. There's Paul to this young man, Timothy, to faithful people, to others as well. And that's really what the ministry of Christ was. I mean, someone said, well, I'm discipling 20 people. Well, you're better than Jesus. He only discipled 12 and he was God. And that's a tremendous ministry advantage, by the way, being deity.
Funny that. Yeah.
Yeah, that may sound a little irreverent, but we used to have a silly saying, lives reproduce or people reproduce. If your parents did not have children, it's unlikely you will either. So the idea is that someone is strong in their own faith. They help others to grow to maturity as they have with the things that they have found are really helpful to them in their faith, like prayer and knowing the scriptures and telling people about Jesus, so that they are able to do the same thing as well. So we have Christ's commandment, make disciples, Paul's strategy how to do it. You do the things that I've done with you and do it with people that are able to do it with others as well. Now that's reproducing, that's exponential growth, that's multiplication.
Mm-hmm.
So we used to have a silly saying that if someone came to your church and said, I have two financial programs that I'm going to offer you. One is $1 million a day for a year. The other's a penny a week doubled for a year. You're smiling. I can see you. You know, you've heard this before, probably. Well, at the end of a month, the church, if they chose plan A, $1 million a day, would have $30 million. And they'd have about 8 cents if they chose the penny a week doubled. But at the end of a year, plan A would be $365 million, which is a lot. But plan B, just the penny doubled each week, would be $20 trillion, which is half the USA's national debt. So that's the plan, is that a young a Christian, strong in their own faith, can help others, and then that person can help others as well. So I literally could walk by a guy at the grocery store who is a fruit of my ministry and not even know who it is, because he may be generations down the road.
Yeah, which is nice. Sorry, excuse me. Which is a nice feeling, right? Because
Yes.
Because you don't know whether or not how far you've made a difference down the line. No, I can see that. I can see that. Well, listen, James, we are running out of time, so we've got time for one last question here. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. We could talk for hours, right? This is the problem. Oh dear. Anyway, so thinking back then, right, to Jacob. If Jacob could speak directly to believers today, all right, who fear that they're falling short, I think most of us feel that, right? What message do you think that he would give them? What would he say to me, basically?
I love that question. Yeah, that's what my main character Jacob say. First of all, no matter how gifted or skilled or committed a Christian is, they're going to have doubts. I call it the killer D's: discouragement and doubt. And the wonderful thing about God is he's not afraid of our questions at all. He basically says, ask me anything. Now, if our doubt is of God's love, power, or wisdom, then we're in trouble. For example, if we doubt God really loves us, he could be a powerful, wise person who could care less. If we doubt that, God is powerful, we might think he's a loving, wise person, but there's stuff he just can't do. So there's a sense that God's sovereignty is defined as, at least in these three ways, he is wise, loving, and powerful. So I think what Jacob would want to say, first of all, to someone who's not a believer, if you're an honest agnostic, as I was, and you're really looking for truth, there's a Bible statement that says, those that are searching to know about God, first of all, can tentatively believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. That's in Hebrews 11. And then the reward is, God says, I demonstrate my love for people, and that while they're yet doing wrong things, my son died for them to pay that price. So the Christian faith is, I think he would say to a non-believer, if you're really searching for truth, consider Christ. He meets the 5 philosophical tests. I won't go into those. I used to teach philosophy of if something is valid. And Christianity does that. But it's also, we have a loving God who draws us to him. To those who are Christians, I think Jacob's message would be, embrace the worth and power of the individual. the worth and power of an individual Christian to make an eternal difference in the lives of others. So our own lives are the greatest leverage we have in the lives of others. And so I think that's what Jake would say, is like, just tell people about Jesus and help them to grow. That's it. That's ministry right there. Love and truth.
Yeah. And there you are. That's your exponential thing again, isn't it, really? When
yes,
the message is being passed on and on and on through generations
yes.
of listeners.
Well, I got to let you know, today's my birthday. So your gift to me was just your excellent moderation of this discussion. And I so appreciate the chance to be here and having this discussion with you.
Fantastic, James. Well, I've really enjoyed it. So, it's been great. Happy birthday, by the way. And
Thank you.
it's been great to talk to you. And you've given me some food for thought as well, which is, nice. So that's good. But to our listeners, thank you for joining us on the BrightWord Books podcast. It's been a privilege to sit down with James Cunneen and explore the heart and inspiration behind At Night He Remembers. Now, remember, this is Jacob's lifelong walk of faith that reminds us that serving God is often found not in grand achievements, as we've discussed, but in steady obedience, quiet impact, and trusting that God uses every season of our lives, seen and unseen. So, if today's conversation has encouraged you or sparked reflection on your own spiritual journey, we invite you to pick up a copy of the book and experience Jacob's story firsthand. Make sure also to subscribe to the podcast for more thoughtful discussions with authors whose works inspire, challenge, and strengthen the faith of readers around you. Thank you for listening. And until next time, may you continue pursuing the purpose God has placed on your life. James Cunneen, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Have a great day.
Thanks.